Episode 4. I won't ask this time, he said hurriedly as Maeve smirked at his response. Clearly too spicy for the males at the moon pack. She commented as she stretched languidly and rolled her eyes internally at her. Alpha Nocturne agrees to your demands. Is there nothing else? He inquired cautiously, and shook her head. Very well. We have a business to attend to in the city, so we can collect you tomorrow night from your parents' pack. Is this acceptable? And nodded quietly. Very well. Then, if you'll sign your name here as acceptance of the first draft of the contract, then any further alterations can be made at a later date with both parties' approval. Understood. And reached for the stylus and signed and printed her name. Then, if there's nothing else, Alpha Nocturne, Alan, I'll leave now and head home to make the necessary arrangements. You should call me Adam. Referring to me as Alpha Nocturne is going to draw suspicious eyes. Very well, Adam. I'll see you tomorrow night. And grinned as she stood and made her way out. After she had left, Adam turned to Alan and smirked. Happy now? Contracted mate and Luna for the pack, he said as he leaned back and let his head rest on the high back of the seating, closing his eyes in satisfaction as he did so. Silence met his words before a cautious voice answered. Alpha, have you ever met that woman before? No. It's just… Spit it out, Alan, Adam said impatiently, his brows creasing in a frown. That woman is Anne Veritas, the Alpha King's daughter. Alan said hesitantly. Adam's eyes flew open and he stared at the ceiling momentarily before leaning forward and looking directly at Alan. Perhaps it would be wise to find out what we can about her then. Who she is marrying, which company she is working for, and why she wants so desperately to get out of that wedding. Alan nodded as he jotted down the requests of his Alpha and began sending instructions out to their intelligence and surveillance team. Oh, and Alan? Yes, Alpha, he said lightly as he paused in his work and glanced up to meet his Alpha's deadly gaze. Don't refer to her as that woman again. She is your Luna from this day forward, and don't forget it. He growled as he stood to leave. After her discussion with Alpha Nocturne and his beta, and headed straight home. She avoided the main streets as much as possible in case she inadvertently bumped into anyone on the way home. She swore internally at herself as she scurried through the poorly lit streets. How could she have been so stupid? Not only would she most likely be the hot topic of gossip over the next few weeks, but she had also managed to inadvertently bind herself to one of the most feared and notorious Alpha in their community. That thought alone was enough to sober her up almost instantly. As she navigated her way through the extensive grounds and into her home, she shut the side entrance door as quietly as possible, desperate not to draw attention to herself arriving home so late at night. She could hear lively voices from one of the drawing rooms, the sound punctuated with laughter as she crept past. Her face hardened as she heard the familiar tones of her stepsister and stepmother, with the occasional comment from her father. Her heart lurched painfully as the sudden feeling of being completely adrift from her once loving father wormed its way into her mind. With a small sigh, and continued along the hallway with the skirts of her wedding dress bunched up and held tightly in her arms. She managed to make it to the bottom of the sweeping staircase before suddenly the door of the drawing room behind her was flung open, banging noisily on the wall and the sound amplified by the echoey corridors, and jumped slightly before freezing as the familiar sickly sweet tones of her stepsister Ada reached her ears. Oh, Mom, Dad, look who only just arrived home, Ada announced, feigning shock as she called over her shoulder to them. I didn't even realize and was out. Look at the time. On the eve of your wedding as well. What will people say? She gasped, clearly determined to put on a good show, and whirled around furiously and glared through narrowed eyes at Ada. Oh my, look at your dress, Ada exclaimed loudly. It's positively ruined. How on earth will you wear that now for the ceremony tomorrow? Ada came to a stop in front of and folded her arms as she ran her eyes disdainfully over her disheveled appearance. She snorted quietly and leaned in to whisper in Anne's ear. "No wonder Brad couldn't wait to be inside me. Just look at the state of you." She sneered and clenched her fingers into fists as she fought desperately to stop Maeve from launching at Ada and escalating this further. "Don't just stand there and take this. The little bitch needs to know her place. Let me teach her a lesson she won't forget." Maeve snarled angrily. "Maeve, we can't. She doesn't have a wolf yet. You know the laws. It wouldn't be a fair fight, and the punishment." "Screw the punishment, and let me just bite her a little bit, maybe remove one of her limbs. At least then she'll have fewer appendages to wrap around other people's mates." She snapped viciously as she tried to surge forwards, and closed her eyes tightly, clenched her jaw, and fought back against her wolf as Ada sniggered. What's wrong? Is your little wolf angry?" It didn't take long for Anne to regain control, her wolf slinking off to slump in a corner and growl threateningly. Before long, the rage of her wolf had subsided and silence descended, and opened her eyes to glare icily at her sister. "What do you think, Ada? You slept with her soulmate, the one who was intended as our perfect match. I know you hate me, but it was unnecessary." And finally replied, her face calm and composed.
Full story is available at novelpalace.com. Click the link in the comment section to get it free.